Hello, winners, and welcome to Two for the Win with your hosts, Nick and Wil. So we are going to talk today, for those of you who are deeper thinkers, about Carl Jung and leadership. What does Carl Jung have to do with leadership? Well, stay tuned to find out because we're going to dive into it. But until then, please be sure you subscribe, share, and follow Two for the Win on your favorite platform. And also want to give a shout out to Nick Menard and nickmenard.com, as well as his Amazon best-selling book, The 1% Push Legacy, for sponsoring today's episode. Happy Monday, Nick.
Happy Monday, Wil. Hello, winners.
Hello. So we have, many people may know of Carl Jung as a philosopher and a psychologist, which he was both. What they may not necessarily think about is, well, how does that apply to leadership? In particular, what he's talking about, shadow personas. Sounds spooky. I was actually thinking we probably should have saved this for a Halloween episode or something with the shadow persona, but no, we're going to cover it now. So anyway, but, I know you and I don't necessarily talk a lot about philosophers, although we do talk about Stoicism from time to time. But when I first broached this topic with you, I'm just kind of curious, what went through your mind? You're probably thinking, oh, here goes Wil again. What's going through this head of his?
Yeah, I was curious, and I will be totally transparent. I was not extremely familiar with this, but the beauty of our podcast is that we're not only doing it for our audience, we do it for yourself as well. And we believe that in leadership, you need to learn all the time. And so that's going to be something I'm going to learn about. And also, I will chip in when I hear something that I feel like I can talk about, and I will shut up for the rest of the time.
It's all good. Everyone wants to hear from you, so it's all good. But yeah, so those who are familiar with Carl Jung, he talks a lot about a shadow persona, and it's not going to do it full justice, but to just keep it summarized in this podcast, a shadow persona is kind of like your underlying self, which sometimes you consciously it shows. More often than not, it's subconscious, and it kind of drives different things. So think about one easier way to think about it is, how do you get your feeling of importance, right? Some people, when you're in a leadership position, they get their feeling of importance from helping others. Others, it's about the recognition. Others, it's about contributing to something greater than themselves, a nobler motive. Others, it could be power. Right. And all those things are legit, and none of those things are necessarily wrong per se. It's just most of those things resonate with people, but to various degrees. Some it's about money, right. And doing it. So anyway, the fundamental premise about Carl Jung and how you can think about it in terms of leadership is it basically represents parts of your personality that you may reject, suppress, or deny, but they're there. It's bubbling underneath the surface, and it's probably impacting your paradigm of how you're viewing things, or maybe even how you think about deciding to do something or not to do something. But they're there. And for those who are reflective, and sometimes, although it's tough, stay, calm in the moment and think about it, you can identify it, right? But it's not like they disappear. They're always kind of there. And basically, it could be impacting the ways in which you're leading your organizations or leading other people through having different blind spots, or maybe it triggers an emotional reaction or a habitual pattern. So one of the reasons why I started thinking about this and potentially having an episode about it was for myself. So I was finding myself on certain meetings, and it was getting harder and harder to suppress my emotions on certain things. And I'm like, why am I getting so triggered? Like, you can tell on the surface why, right? But it's one thing to have something being discussed, and maybe it doesn't align, it irritates you, but it was causing like an emotive response within. And I'm like, what is it that it's doing it? And it was basically kind of setting me up to maybe overreact, which actually lessens my influence, right? Because if you overreact, sometimes that causes lose credibility. Or it could be a blind spot, like maybe I didn't agree with something because for whatever reason it didn't align with my principles, but maybe it was the better thing to do, right? Trying to be objective. Certainly compulsive behaviors. I think when it comes to leadership, I have a natural inclination to action. Like I rather try something first and get the something moving versus planning it out to perfection. But sometimes maybe I'm moving a little too quickly, right? And I should spend a little bit more time on the front end thinking about it. Or it could be leadership patterns that seem out of character. And I think for many people in the world over the last year and a half, with the introduction of AI and some of the various disruptive events that have been happening globally, we've seen different sides of people that we haven't previously seen before. And it's because of how that adversity and it's causing a pattern behavior that maybe they haven't done before previously, whether it's in a leadership position or in a workplace or maybe even a personal life. So anyway, that's kind of like the overarching premise of it. I know I saw your head nodding when I was talking about the action orientated and stuff, but any like high level comments on what I've just shared so far that kind of
No, I mean,
resonating
it
with what you
proved,
heard?
if anything, it proved again that you are an exceptional leader, because not a lot of leaders are actually retrospect about the decision, the way they're handling things, and want to understand the why you react the way you react, about emotions that you mentioned. And who can speak better emotion than me? I'm an emotional stick. So I'm triggered. I'm very easily triggered when I feel like we're going in the wrong direction, to my understanding or to my perspective. I tend to just shut down. And I know it's not good. I know I should be more open and listen and understand the why or where they come from, what that come from. I mean, but for me, when I feel like something is so flagrantly wrong, I tend to shut down directly. And I have a very strong nonverbal. So people will see Nick doesn't like this. And it got me in trouble in the corporate world, because in corporate it's hard. That's why I love to be self-employed, own my own business. So I'm the one who can regret some of my decision maybe. But in all seriousness, I applaud that, because it's hard to be able to see that from the outside when you feel a certain way. Definitely when you are a successful person in whatever you're doing, which you are, by going you know from zero to hero in 11 years, in less than 11 years. So no, but seriously. So in for me, when I'm thinking about what you just say, it's and we talked about it recently, but I tend to, in entrepreneurship, I will talk about that because it's more what I'm, more familiar
Mhm.
with. Is I'm someone who take risk. I'm a risk taker, but a high level risk taker. I lost six-figure thing in like this by taking the wrong decisions. But even when that happened, and that happened in like 3-4 years ago, when that happened, normal people will think, because it's not like I'm millionaires, I'm another millionaire. So that's a large sum of money. But when that happened, I thought, okay, I was still making a good decision because it was an investment.
Mm.
And it doubled my investment a couple of weeks later. So I made the good decision to take the risk to invest that six-figure money. The problem is that I was not smart enough to take the money out at that time, and thought it was continued keep climbing, and it crashed,
Mhm.
lost everything. And so most normal people will think, "Oh my God, I'm not going to invest any kind of money like this ever again because I have this thing." Well, 6 months later, I saw another opportunity, and I invest on this. It was not as much, but it was still a large amount, and it was a success. And I think the good thing to think about is that it's not because you fail in something sometimes, something one time, that you will keep failing about that thing another time. But you need to learn from your mistakes.
Mhm.
So I know it's contradictional, but it's not. It's more like you you had a good decision with investment on that aspect 3 years ago, but you didn't take off when you should have taken off because you were too greedy. You thought that it's going to go even higher. Be happy with doubling your money in 2 weeks.
Mhm.
In the other side, I kept going because when I believe in something, I just need to do it. All right. So I should have like a devil Nick and an angel Nick, and listening to both. I keep listening to it's gonna work all the time. And I made mistakes. But if I was listening always only to the angel Nick, like like saying like, like pay attention, be careful and stuff like that, I would probably still in Belgium working at the bank because I was successful after 4 years working at the bank and growing so much from the teller to the position I had. But I left because I wanted more in my life and I knew I had reached a ceiling. So you need to take, I always say that, and I probably say that on the podcast multi-time. You need to take risk in life. Without taking risk, you cannot fail, but you cannot succeed. I say
Mhm.
that a lot. Now, there are levels to this, and there are risk level. Everybody have a risk tolerance, different risk tolerance, right? My risk tolerance is super high. I'm always going for the high risk, so the high reward will follow, but also the crash will follow a lot faster.
Mhm.
So I need to be able to be more, continue to be who I am, so a risk taker, but have maybe more people around me or more get the advice from more people about the best way to avoid the crash by
Mhm.
having maybe more nets around me when I do something. And
Yeah.
that's, I think, for the shadow that you mentioned, that's probably what I'm thinking about first on the entrepreneurial level based on the conversation.
Yeah, makes total sense, and appreciate your vulnerability and sharing that. I think, we've all had similar situations, maybe to different degrees, obviously, in terms of dollar. Like some people may not even think about investing that much. That might be outside their realm. But I think some of the various things you touched on, which are really important, is if you're going to invest in something, no matter what it is, could be a career, could be an investment, could be a business, you have to set those parameters. Like, what's your stop loss? So if you want to use like an investment terminology, what's your stop loss and what are you happy pulling your profits from, right? And taking your gains. And if you go into it and you've kind of had those established, that's good because one of the ways, as I was thinking about what your experience you shared, like when you get to that point of doubled your money, if you went into that and said, if I double my money, I'm happy and I'm pulling it out, great. You pull it out, you never look back. The other thing you could say is, okay, if I get to a place where I double my money, if I'm going to let it ride and see if it can go higher, but if it goes to a place where instead of doubling my money, I only made 80%, that's my stop loss and pull it out, right? Or of course, on the inverse, if you invest in something that just doesn't make any money and it loses, like at some point you just say, okay, this is it. I'm not going to take any other losses. I'll just learn from it, like you're saying, and move on. So I think there's a lot of beauty in what you're sharing in terms of educating people. You can have what is your point where you're happy with the results? You're not going to look back and be like, oh, I should have held on to it longer. No, you take it. Or what is the point where you're going to let it ride? But at some point, if it starts to slip back, you stop and you pull out and you're still making profit. Or there's a terminology in accounting. I was talking about stop loss, which obviously is, I think most people probably get if you invested $1 and it drops to 70 cents. If your stop loss is 65 cents, if it gets to 65 cents, you just say, that's it. I'm done. But there's another part like sunk costs. Like sometimes you can invest something and it could be the easiest analogy is time, right? If you invest your time into something, but it doesn't yield dividend, you can never get that time back. That's a sunk cost. But it doesn't mean that there's not learnings you can get from it so you can apply going forward. So really loved and appreciate you sharing that, being vulnerable and sharing that. I think in terms of Jung, what he talks about a bit is in the when you can sometimes tell when your shadow persona is coming to the surface, it could be where you're over controlling. Like everyone always wants to have some degree of control, but sometimes you can tell they're going way above and beyond. That's something I'm noticing lately in a variety of formats where like micromanaging and different things like that. It could be over helping. Like sometimes like you help more above and beyond than what's needed or what people are even asking for, but it's because that's how you kind of feel like maybe you're doing the right things. And you could be another term could be like over servicing. Conflict avoidance, like you talked about it, like basically you're not somebody I've ever known to be afraid of conflict. But when you talk about when you're shutting down, you're avoiding the conflict because you know that you might maybe say something that you don't want to say, or it's not worth it in your mind to say it. And so you just you tune out. That's conflict avoidance. It's a different way. Like the other people, I
True.
think conflict avoidance is, oh, I'm afraid to say something. That's not the case with Nick Menard, but he's just trying to not escalate a situation. So it's a different way of conflict avoidance. Then you have defensiveness, which is pretty straightforward, and perfectionism. So those are some of the different ways of which there may be signals that your shadow performance is coming up. But there's basically a handful of shadow patterns that Jung talks about. And I'm going to just read 5 real quick, and then I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to see which one you want to kind of go deeper in that resonates with you. But the funny thing about it is a lot of times, and this sounds counterintuitive, but your strengths can cause the shadow patterns. They create them because you get really good at something. So for example, high performers are often succeed because of their strengths, right? But where those strengths get overextended, they can create shadow behaviors. So decisiveness can sometimes then start drifting into being over-controlling. Or empathy, too much empathy can become where you're over-rescuing, and maybe you're not having accountable conversations, things like that. Too much diplomacy could be conflict avoidance. Like, are you always trying to have the shake across the aisle, or at some point do you just need to stand your ground and say, these are my non-negotiables and this is what I'm saying? So it's kind of a bit of a paradox, right? So the strength that helped the leader rise through the organization or rise in their business can become the behavior at times that becomes their shadow if they don't look at it. So the patterns that they have is that Jung talks about is the controller, the rescuer, the avoider, and those are, I guess, the 3 big ones on that one. And then there'll be some behaviors we can talk about anyway. So the controller is the core fear is a fear of chaos or failure, right? And the leader believes they're not involved in every decision. The organization will lose control. So that's one. The second one is the rescuer. And the core fear with the rescuer is fear of rejection or disappointing others. And so that can, like, you're trying to solve problems for others, avoid accountability conversations, stepping in too quickly. We talked about psychological safety in the past. Like, are you willing to let people make mistakes? You're going to try to protect them from ever making a mistake and have those learnings, or protecting underperformers. And then the third shadow pattern, the avoider, the core fear is fear of conflict or damaging relationships. And some of the behavior patterns there is delaying feedback, passive communication, not being clear and direct, tolerating poor performance, or consensus-driven decisions. So out of the controller, the rescuer, or the avoider, which one do you want to go in with, my friend?
The controller.
All right. So again, for everyone, controller, the core fear is fear of chaos or failure. A leader believes if they're not involved in every decision, the organization will lose control. Behavioral patterns, and I'll pass it over to my friend to talk more about: micromanagement, constant checking, reluctance to delegate, overriding team decisions. So you say, hey, what do you want to do as a team? They give you the answer. You're like, no, we're going to do something else. All right, my friend. So where do you want to go with the controller?
The controller is, for me, I cannot see. And again, it's because probably the blinders I have on when I feel like something is so very wrong. I'm pretty sure controller in some aspects would be good, but I don't see it. And maybe you will enlighten me there. But the controller, even if a controller is successful as a leader, all right, let's say like you are a leader in a service department role, and you are outstanding. Your number are fantastic, retention, like everything is fantastic. I still don't believe in the controllers. Why? When the controller leave, everything will crash. And I don't believe this is the right way to lead. A leader should be able to leave for a month or 2 or 3 and come back, and the numbers are the same or even higher. Why? Because you teach the pattern and you let people have their own experience while you were on top, while you were leading. So even if you leave, they still have the good pattern. Why? Because they've been acting on those patterns for X amount of time. A controller, control freak, like we call it, they always need to be on top of everything because they cannot let the control go. So yes, the success is there if they are great in the job that they're teaching. But as soon as they leave, they crumble because the team are not able to do anything without them being actually there. So it's not beneficial for your business, for whatever company you're working for, etc., etc. And then controller are usually they don't like success from other people because they want to control their own destiny. And if someone else is successful, they will try to figure out a way to make it negative because they want to be the the reason why. And if someone in another department, another team are actually performing at a high level, they will look to find an issue in that region or in that team because they cannot understand the reason why someone is so different than them and still be successful. And usually come the pittiness with it. I will take an example. Years ago in a company I was working at, I'm someone who gives a lot of trust as a leader, and I let people make mistakes. I'm not a neurosurgeon, so I let people make mistakes, and then it's a teaching moment.
Mhm.
And then we get better, and they will never make that mistake again. If they do, then we come into a problem. But I let that go because I want to make sure that they understand mistakes are normal as long as you learn from them, and then you don't do those anymore, and you can teach the right way for the next people after you. All right. So I was doing that in the whole region that I had back in the day. And a team close by were always complaining because they could never get to that spot, to that number one spot. And they started looking at everything we were doing and trying to cause issue in our way to handling things, in our way to lead. So an example was, hey, Nick's team, they're leaving an hour early, or Nick's team, they take 2-hour lunch. And I was lucky back in the day to have a leader who was all about numbers and development. So if a person has a number and if they develop the people the right way, that's what it should be all about in leadership. Well, that leader at the time, I remember said, well, when you have the number of that region, you can let your people go also an hour too early. And that's leadership to me. But that person was not far away from what we were doing number-wise, but they were so jealous because of their controlling aspect that how can that leader who is so opposite as me, who is so more open, a great culture in the team, and I cannot get that. So I will try to reduce someone else what they're doing. And that's a controlling aspect of it because you cannot accept someone else is actually better than you by doing completely opposite of you. And then when that person left, the company, the whole team dropped as well. So it's proof a point again that it's not something that I would ever be in agreement with. But you probably, because you don't have the blinders I have about things that I'm so 100% sure about based on my experience. But maybe you will find area where a controller will actually be beneficial, but I don't see it.
No, I don't think so because, the cost of over controlling. So again, there's one thing about having accountability and drive for performance, right? So that's a strength and that can lead people to perform well so that they get hired into leadership. But this is what it was talking about with the shadow personas when you over index on strengths and you channel that into that over controlling, it's going to have an adverse impact. You can have short-term gains with anything. Like short-term, anything can happen, good or positive or negative, right? Because it's in the short term. But what you were talking about is sustainability. When you talk about does a leader leave for whatever, and does the team performance stay the same or improve? That is a testament of solid leadership because they have the habits, they built the principles. They don't need you having them underneath their thumb all the time in order to perform. When the heat and light is on, they're going to perform because that's the habit. That's the mindset they have. So when you have the controller mentality, the cost of this shadow is decision bottlenecks. People are like, oh, they can't make a decision because they don't want to make a wrong decision. So they're always checking with you on stuff. Are people checking with you on silly things to get approval? That could be a signal that you're being a little bit over controlling versus do they just inform you, not ask for your permission to do something, especially when it's a trivial type of thing. They can have reduced initiative, right? Because who Who thrives when they always feel like they're being held under somebody's thumb? Like, rarely do people thrive under that, because what does that signal? It signals a lack of trust. So there's a difference, and I've been saying this a lot recently. There's a difference between intensity and discipline of focus. You can increase intensity. I could have people come in to a meeting every day of the week if I wanted to because of my positional authority. But how do you think they're going to respond to that versus a discipline of focus? This is what we have to do. This is when we have to do it by. This is why we have to do it. And then you hold them accountable. When you have somebody who is micromanaging and putting on a bunch of meetings, it's because they failed on the other side. They failed to have the clarity of what the focus is. They failed to have the discipline to remain with that focus area. They failed to articulate the why. And more often than not, it's because they failed on having that clarity of standards and then holding people accountable to those standards, And so how do they over-index? If performance starts dropping, well, I'm gonna put a bunch of meetings and list manage the heck out of people. What signal does that send? It's not going to be good. And you'll probably end up with team burnout, and you're definitely have, in the long run, slower organizational speed, because you may get short-term results. And in fact, you probably will, right? With that level of intensity, you probably will get some positive short-term results. But at what cost? Are you going to have higher rates of regretted attrition, greater open territory, less career development with people, less career progression with people, because they're like, I would never want to go into leadership. Why would I don't want to lead like this. So, what kind of thing are you embodying? So control creates compliance, not leadership. If every decision flows through one person, leadership is not being scaled. Dependency is. And that, my friends, is the shadow pattern of the controller. And you see it, especially in times when things aren't going great. It flares up.
That's interesting. Like I said, I didn't know the term, but I understand the concept, and I really like that, actually. So that's
yeah. Jung is a fascinating person, and again, there's a lot of different behavioral psychologists, and like anything in life, you take what you like and leave the rest. But his shadow persona talk, and obviously he talks about it not just in business, it's mainly about personal relationships and stuff, but it's fascinating. It's worth investigating. And hey, with the way things are now with ChatGPT or Claude or Grok, or you don't have to read the 10 to 15 books or the hundreds of research papers Jung wrote. Just plug it into one of those and you can find out more about the shadow persona. But the key thing is, if you're noticing a shadow behavior of being a controller, build systems rather than supervision. We had an episode in the past, we talked about switch, where we shape the path. Systems shape the path. So build systems rather than supervision. Delegate outcomes, not just tasks, and measure results instead of activity. I had a conversation with somebody earlier today, and we were discussing the difference about what it looks like to be busy versus to be productive. Sometimes those things are not the same. A lot of people look busy. Not very many people are ultimately very productive.
Easy work is not productive.
No. For rescuers, separate empathy from it. So the rescuers and avoiders we didn't go into, but again, happy to do another episode on this if you want, or check it out, various resources. But for rescuers, you have to separate empathy from responsibility. You can be empathetic, but ultimately you have to be responsible for the results. People have to be responsible for theirs. Support people without removing consequences. We've done a number of episodes about that. And then allow productive struggle. Again, I always use the analogy, when my kids were learning to ride a bike and I took off the training wheels, I did not hold on to the seat of the bike. I let them fall. Did they cry a little bit? Yes. Did they skin their knee a little bit? Yes. But ultimately, they learned balance, and they learned how to ride their bike alone, which it would have took a far lot longer and maybe less effective if I just let them all the time without the training wheels, but I'm holding on the bike, whatever, like they figure it out. And then for avoiders, address issues early, frame feedback as an investment and growth. We've talked about that with performance management and 360 feedback. Like, it's an opportunity to grow. It's not about being punitive, and use clarity to strengthen trust. And you can do that. But any last thoughts on this topic that we talked about today, my friend?
What you said about the bike resonate with me. If you never let your kid go on a bike, he or she will never fall, but they will never bike. So
That's right.
always remember, you need to. When I was a kid, my parents used to have like a caravan thing in the Ardennes in Belgium, and we were going there every weekend. And I was I was a year old maybe, and my parents brought me to a pool. I mean, I was too young to remember, but they literally brought me to a instructor for babies for pool, because around our caravan is a lake, is a pool, is so many stuff. So they want to make sure that if I fall, I don't drown directly. And so they drew me in the pool, and I will never forget, because my dad was recording everything, and we watched that later. And at the end of the day, I swam until 11 years old at a very high level. He literally videotaped it. She literally put me, like a baby. So she put me inside and outside, just doing this. And then when I start, be able to float a little bit, what she was doing is throwing me in the pool, and I just need to come back. And she threw me further and further away just for me to come back. And when I was able to come back with a smile, without crying and anything like that, that's a win. But if they never threw me in the pool, I would never have been learning. So for people who are afraid that, oh my God, what if it doesn't work? Well, hopefully it doesn't work, but you can save it. Or if in business it doesn't work the first call, but you get better as you make those calls in sales. You don't get better by doing one-on-one, training, like by doing shadow or whatever it's called now these days. But by doing that, you don't learn. You learn by actually picking the phone and calling a real client. That's how you learn, and that's how you get coaching, and that's why you get better and better. And after 10 calls, you will always get better. 100 calls, you get amazing. 1,000 calls, you get a master. But you need to call, and that's the difference between avoiding this and actually doing those steps. And if someone is a great leader, they will let you make those mistakes, make sure that you learn from them, and coach you on those, and trust you that you will not make those same mistakes again.
Love it. So there you have, that's a mic drop way to wrap up this episode. So thank you for that, my friend. And thanks again for sharing all that you did. And for our winners, consider the shadow personas. Where are your strengths over-indexing and actually maybe inhibiting your leadership? Take that time to observe the environment and observe within, so that you can make yourself the quality leader every time when you face these situations. So that'll do it for today's episode, this Monday Mindset. So again, please be sure to subscribe, share, and follow 2 for the Win on your favorite platform. And thanks again to Nick Menard and nickmenard.com and his Amazon best-selling book, The 1% Push Legacy, now available on hardcover, not just paperback. You can get it hardcover or on Audible. So check that out if you haven't already. Thanks again, and we will see you next week, winners.
Bye, winners.